Learn about developer tools for working remotely in this episode of Azure Tips and Tricks. In this episode, we'll explore the collaboration tools for developers and development teams that help them to work remotely. The first thing that a developer needs is a place to store and share code. GitHub provides such a system, and so does Azure DevOps in the form of Azure repos. Azure Repos is a modern Git repository that you can use to store your code in and share it with your team. You can connect to it with any Git client, and it supports code search, pull requests, and more. You can create unlimited private Git repositories with Azure Repos, and you can create public repositories as well. When your code is in a source control system like Azure Repos, you can work on it anywhere from any client. That is precisely what Visual Studio Codespaces provides, a remote integrated development environment that you can use from anywhere. You can spin up a Visual Studio Codespaces environment in minutes and use it to develop your app in the browser, like here. Visual Studio Codespaces looks and feels exactly like Visual Studio Code, and it has the same capabilities. By default, it has IntelliCode and LiveShare enabled, and you can install any Visual Studio Code extension that you want. Besides using it in a browser, you can also use it from Visual Studio, GitHub, and Visual Studio Code, like this. Visual Studio Codespaces simply acts as the remote backbone that does all the heavy lifting for your coding work. What remote developers really need is a great way to collaborate in real time. They can with Visual Studio LiveShare. Here on the left we see Visual Studio Code, and on the right is Visual Studio. With LiveShare I can simply start a collaborative session like this, and in Visual Studio I can join that session by simply opening the session link. LiveShare is available in Visual Studio Code, and in GitHub. Once connected, I can see and browse and use all of the code that I have open in Visual Studio Code without having to clone it on my local machine. And I can work on it together with other developers. LiveShare creates a real-time collaboration environment where we can really work with each other on code, even when we are remote. It is so powerful that it can even allow session participants to start a debug session on the code, which starts the debug process on the session host, which is the Visual Studio Code on the left in this case. Really cool stuff. Azure Repos, Visual Studio Codespaces, and Visual Studio LiveShare are some of the tools that enable developers and teams to work remotely with ease. Go and check them out.